The year is 1918. In the city of Vienna, the once mighty Habsburg Empire is crumbling. The man who sits on the throne, Emperor Karl I, is the last of his line, a line that had ruled Central Europe for more than 6 centuries. He is the descendant of emperors who once commanded armies from the Atlantic to the Danube, who controlled the destiny of Europe, who married their daughters to the kings of France, Spain, and England. But now, as the guns of World War I fall silent and revolution sweeps across the continent, Karl understands the terrible truth that has haunted his family for generations. His bloodline is about to be erased from history, and he is powerless to stop it. The Habsburg Empire, once the most powerful political entity in Europe, is dying. The war has drained its resources, shattered its economy, and destroyed its prestige. The emperor's subjects, who had once pledged their loyalty to the crown, now look to new leaders, republicans, socialists, and nationalists who promise a future without kings and queens. The empire that had survived the Napoleonic Wars, the revolutions of 1848, and the unification of Germany and Italy cannot survive the pressures of the modern world, and Karl, the last Habsburg emperor, knows that his family's reign is over. Nobody was supposed to know that the bloodline of the most powerful dynasty in Europe would end not with a grand battle, but with a quiet abdication in a hunting lodge in Austria. Nobody was supposed to witness the moment when the last Habsburg emperor closed his eyes forever on the throne, leaving behind nothing but a name that would go through history without a crown to carry it forward. But the story of the Habsburg bloodline is not just a story of endings. It is a story of tragedy, of loss, of madness, and inbreeding, of a family that married its own cousins for centuries to preserve its power, only to destroy itself from within. The official narrative is neat, clean, satisfying even. The Habsburgs ruled Europe for over 600 years. They produced emperors, kings, archdukes, and queens. They fought wars, built cathedrals, patronized the arts, and shaped the course of Western civilization. But in 1918, the empire collapsed, the monarchy was abolished, and the Habsburgs were exiled. Their bloodline, the purest royal line in Europe, was scattered to the winds. And yet, somewhere in the world tonight, ordinary people carry the blood of the Habsburgs, not through the imperial line itself, but through the countless branches, bastards and collateral descendants who refused to be erased. They carry the blood of a dynasty that once ruled the world. To understand how the Habsburg bloodline survived, we must go back to the beginning. Not to 1918, but to 1273, when a little-known Swiss count named Rudolf von Habsburg was elected King of Germany. He was the founder of a dynasty that would dominate Europe for centuries. His descendants would marry into every royal house in Europe, transforming a small castle in Switzerland into a global empire. The Habsburgs were masters of marriage. Their motto was simple: Bella gerant ali tu Felix Austria nube. Let others wage war, but thou, happy Austria, marry. For centuries they married their daughters and sons into the royal families of Europe, accumulating territory, influence, and power without ever firing a shot. They controlled Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, Bohemia, Hungary, Croatia, and much of Italy. They were the most powerful family in the world, but their obsession with preserving the purity of their bloodline came at a terrible cost. The Habsburgs practiced consanguinity, marriage between close relatives, on an unprecedented scale. They married uncles to nieces, cousins to cousins, and occasionally siblings to siblings. The result was devastating. The Habsburg jaw, a grotesque deformity characterized by a protruding lower jaw, Thick lips and a jutting chin became the hallmark of the dynasty. The family suffered from infertility, mental illness, and premature death. Generation after generation, the Habsburgs destroyed themselves from within, unable to produce healthy heirs, unable to escape the curse of their own blood. The most famous example of Habsburg inbreeding was the case of Charles II of Spain, known as El Hechizado, the Bewitched. He was the last Habsburg king of Spain, and his physical and mental disabilities were so severe that his subjects believed he was possessed by demons. His jaw was so deformed that he could not chew his food. His tongue was so swollen that he could barely speak. He suffered from seizures, hallucinations, and severe depression. He was sterile, unable to produce an heir. When he died in 1700, the Spanish Habsburg line died with him. His autopsy revealed that his heart was the size of a peppercorn, his intestines were riddled with gangrene, and his body contained almost no functioning organs. The Habsburgs had literally bred themselves to extinction, and yet they survived. They survived through adoption, through strategic marriages, through the sheer determination of a family that refused to disappear. When Emperor Karl I was forced to abdicate in 1918, he did not surrender his title of Emperor of Austria. He simply went into exile, and his family continued to live as if they were still the rulers of Europe. In 1961, his son Otto von Habsburg renounced all claims to the throne, but the family never truly surrendered their identity. Today, the Habsburgs are still a family. They are not the powerful rulers they once were, but they are still wealthy, influential, and respected. They are businessmen, politicians, and philanthropists. They are the descendants of emperors who once ruled the world, and they still carry the blood of the man who once sat on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. But the story of the Habsburgs is not just a story of a fallen dynasty. It is a story of survival, of resilience, of a family that refused to disappear. The king died, the crown passed, the empire fell, but somewhere in the world, ordinary people may still carry the blood of the man who once ruled millions. The Habsburgs were not the only royal family to face such a fate. Across Europe, royal families were collapsing, empires were falling, and ancient bloodlines were being extinguished. The Romanovs of Russia were executed in a basement in Yekaterinburg. The Hohenzollerns of Germany were sent into exile. The Bourbons of France were scattered to the winds, but the Habsburgs endured. They survived the fall of their empire, the abolition of their monarchy, and the devastation of 2 world wars. The secret of their survival lies in their extraordinary adaptability. Unlike other royal families who clung to their thrones until the very end, the Habsburgs knew when to let go. They did not resist the rise of nationalism. They did not fight the tide of democracy, and they did not try to reclaim their lost territories. Instead, they reinvented themselves. They became diplomats, politicians, and businessmen. They used their family name to open doors and build networks. They leveraged their historical prestige to gain influence in the new world order, and in doing so, they ensured that their bloodline would survive. Consider the story of Otto von Habsburg. Born in 1912, he was the eldest son of Emperor Karl I. He was raised in exile, educated in the finest schools of Europe, and groomed for a throne that no longer existed. They never gave up hope that the Habsburgs would one day return to power. He traveled the world, building alliances with conservative politicians and monarchists, and he became a vocal critic of communism and fascism. He spoke multiple languages fluently, and he was respected by leaders across the political spectrum. He was elected to the European Parliament in 1979, where he served for 2 decades, becoming one of the longest-serving members of the European Parliament. He was a passionate advocate for European integration, and he believed that the Habsburgs had a crucial role to play in the new Europe. Otto von Habsburg's commitment to the European project was not just political, it was personal. He had seen the devastation that nationalism and war could bring, and he was determined to prevent it from happening again. He believed that the Habsburgs, as the traditional rulers of a multicultural empire, were uniquely qualified to promote reconciliation between Europe's nations. He worked tirelessly to build bridges between countries, to promote dialogue between cultures, and to foster a sense of shared European identity. He passed away in 2011 at the age of 98, having witnessed the collapse of the empire his ancestors had built, the rise and fall of communism, and the birth of a new Europe. But Otto von Habsburg was not the only member of the family to play a prominent role in modern history. His brother, Felix von Habsburg, served in the Belgian army and fought against the Nazis during World War II. His sister, Adelheid, helped to organize the resistance against the Nazis in Austria, and his nephew, Karl von Habsburg, continues to serve as a politician and public servant, carrying on the family's tradition of public service. The Habsburgs have adapted to the modern world, but they have never forgotten their heritage. They remain proud of their history, and they continue to honor the legacy of their ancestors. Today, the Habsburgs are scattered across the globe. Some live in Austria, others in Germany, still others in the United States and South America. They have intermarried with other royal families, with aristocrats, and with ordinary people. Their bloodline has spread far beyond the borders of the old empire, flowing into the veins of people from every corner of the world, and while they may no longer hold power, they continue to command respect. They are invited to royal weddings, they are consulted on matters of state, and they are honored by the governments of the countries that once formed their empire. The Habsburgs are a living connection to the past, a bridge between the world of kings and emperors and the world of nation-states and democracies. They remind us of a time when Europe was dominated by dynasties, when the fate of millions was decided by the marriages and alliances of a few powerful families. They also remind us that bloodlines, no matter how powerful, are fragile. They can be extinguished by war, by disease, or by the simple failure to produce an heir, but they can also survive if a family is willing to adapt, to change, and to embrace the future. The story of the Habsburgs is a story of extraordinary resilience. They survived the fall of their empire, the devastation of war, and the challenges of exile. They adapted to a world that had no place for kings and queens, and they found new ways to serve their people. They carried their bloodline forward, not through power, but through purpose. They proved that blood is not the only thing that binds a family to the past. It is also the values they uphold, the traditions they preserve, and the future they build. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of the Habsburg story. It is not the crown that matters. It is the spirit that carries it forward. It is not the throne that defines a family. It is the legacy they leave behind. It is not the power they once held. It is the purpose they find in the future. The Habsburgs have shown that even the mightiest of empires can fall, but a family that refuses to disappear will always find a way to survive. They have shown that bloodlines are not just about biology, they are about history, culture, and identity. They have shown that the legacy of a dynasty is not measured by the length of its rule, but by the depth of its impact. And so, the Habsburgs live on. They live on in the history books, in the castles of Austria, and in the hearts of their descendants. They live on in the values they upheld, the traditions they preserved, and the future they built. They are the royal bloodline that refused to disappear, and their story is not over yet. There is a final element to the story that is rarely mentioned, a detail so unexpected and yet so fitting that it feels almost like fiction. In 2025, the story of the Habsburgs is still being told, not in palaces, not in gold, not in power, but in the quiet lives of people who carry the blood of the emperors. They live in modest homes. They work ordinary jobs. They are not royalty. They are not celebrities, but they carry the blood of a dynasty that once ruled the world. Some of them are descendants of the legitimate line, while others are descendants of illegitimate branches. Some of them know exactly who they are, while others have no idea of their heritage. Some of them embrace their identity, while others reject it. But all of them share a common bond, a connection to the past that is both a privilege and a burden. For some, being a Habsburg descendant is a source of immense pride. It is a reminder of the greatness of their ancestors, of the power they once held, and of the legacy they have inherited. For others, it is a burden, a weight of history that is difficult to carry. They are constantly compared to their ancestors, judged by standards they cannot hope to meet, and haunted by the expectations of a family that once ruled the world. But for most, it is simply a part of who they are, a piece of their identity that they carry with them, whether they like it or not. They carry the blood of emperors and kings, of warriors and diplomats, of visionaries and madmen. They carry the legacy of a dynasty that changed the world, and they will carry it forward into the future. The Habsburgs may no longer have a throne, but they have something far more valuable, a family that refuses to disappear, a bloodline that refuses to die. And as long as there is a single descendant who remembers the name, the dynasty has not truly disappeared. The story of the Habsburgs is a story of endings, but it is also a story of beginnings, of survival, of persistence, of a family that refused to disappear. The king died, the crown passed, the empire fell, but somewhere in the world, ordinary people may still carry the blood of the man who once ruled millions. The Habsburgs have had a profound impact on the modern world. Their influence can be seen in the politics, culture, and society of Europe. Their legacy is visible in the buildings they built, the art they commissioned, and the institutions they founded. They created a civilization that lasted for centuries, and their contributions to the world are still felt today. The Habsburgs were great patrons of the arts. They commissioned some of the most beautiful buildings in Europe, including the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, the Schönbrunn Palace, and the Belvedere Palace. They supported composers like Mozart, Beethoven, and Haydn, and they promoted the development of opera and classical music. They also collected some of the finest art in the world, including works by Rubens, Velázquez, and Titian. The Habsburgs were also great builders of institutions. They founded universities, schools, and libraries. They established hospitals, orphanages, and charities. They created a legal system that ensured justice and fairness for their subjects. They were deeply religious, and they built churches, monasteries, and cathedrals that remain some of the most beautiful buildings in the world. The Habsburgs were also great diplomats. They understood the importance of alliances and treaties, and they were skilled at negotiating peaceful settlements to conflicts. They were able to maintain their empire for centuries because they were able to keep their subjects loyal and their enemies at bay. They were masters of the art of compromise and negotiation. But the Habsburgs were also flawed. They were obsessed with power and prestige. They were willing to sacrifice their own people for the sake of their ambitions. They were arrogant, and They believed that their bloodline was superior to all others. Their arrogance led to their downfall, and their empire collapsed because they refused to adapt to the changing world. And yet, despite their flaws, the Habsburgs left an indelible mark on the world. They were one of the most powerful and influential families in human history, and their story continues to fascinate and inspire people around the world. The Habsburgs were a family of contradictions. They were both brilliant and foolish, generous and greedy, compassionate and cruel. They were a family of extremes, and their story is a testament to the power of ambition and the fragility of power. The Habsburgs are still with us today. They are not just a memory of the past, they are a living presence in the modern world. Their descendants are still alive, and they continue to play a role in the world. They may no longer be kings and queens, but they are still influential figures in politics, business, and culture. The Habsburgs built some of the most magnificent castles and palaces in Europe. These buildings were not just homes, they were statements of power and wealth. They were designed to impress and intimidate, and they succeeded in doing both. The Hofburg Palace in Vienna was the primary residence of the Habsburgs for over 600 years. It is one of the largest and most impressive palace complexes in the world, with over 2,600 rooms spread across 24 buildings. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is visited by millions of tourists every year. The Schönbrunn Palace, located just outside Vienna, was the summer residence of the Habsburgs. It is even more impressive than the Hofburg, with its stunning gardens, fountains, and sculptures. The palace was built in the 17th century, and it was the favorite residence of Empress Maria Theresa, who ruled the Habsburg Empire for 40 years. The Belvedere Palace, also in Vienna, was built as a summer residence for Prince Eugene of Savoy. It is now one of the most famous museums in Austria, housing an impressive collection of art, including works by Gustav Klimt, Egon Schiele, and Oskar Kokoschka. The Habsburgs also owned the Prague Castle, the largest ancient castle in the world, and the Graz Castle, which is one of the best preserved castles in Europe. They owned castles in Hungary, Slovakia, Croatia, and Italy, as well as countless other properties across Europe. These castles are filled with secrets, hidden rooms, secret passages, and mysterious artifacts. Many of them are said to be haunted, and there are countless stories of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences. The castles are a testament to the power and influence of the Habsburgs, and they remain a source of fascination for historians and tourists alike. The Habsburg family tree is one of the most complex and intricate in history. It is a tangled web of marriages, alliances, and power struggles that spans over 700 years. The family produced countless kings, queens, emperors, and archdukes, and their bloodline is still visible in many of the royal families of Europe today. The Habsburg family tree begins with Rudolf I, who was elected King of Germany in 1273. He was succeeded by his son, Albert I, who was assassinated in 1308. The family continued to rule Germany and Austria for the next century, but it was not until the reign of Frederick III in the 15th century that the Habsburgs became a truly powerful dynasty. Frederick III was the first Habsburg to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor, and he established the family as the dominant power in Europe. He was succeeded by his son, Maximilian I, who expanded the empire and married his children into the most powerful royal families in Europe. Maximilian's grandson, Charles V, inherited the entire empire, and he became the most powerful man in the world. He ruled Spain, the Netherlands, Austria, Germany, and large parts of Italy and the New World. He was the first Habsburg to truly rule the world. But Charles V's empire was too large to be governed effectively, and he eventually abdicated, dividing his empire between his son and his brother. The Spanish Habsburgs, led by his son Philip II, would eventually become the most powerful branch of the family, while the Austrian Habsburgs, led by his brother Ferdinand I, would rule the Holy Roman Empire. The Spanish Habsburgs died out in 1700 with the death of Charles II, as discussed earlier. The Austrian Habsburgs continued to rule for another 2 centuries until the collapse of the empire in 1918. The Habsburgs are still alive today, and there are hundreds of living descendants of the family. They have intermarried with other royal families and aristocrats, and their bloodline has spread across the globe. The Habsburg Empire was more than just a political entity. It was a civilization. It was a world unto itself, with its own culture, its own values, and its own way of life. It was a place where people of different nations, religions, and languages could live together in relative harmony. The Habsburg Empire was one of the most diverse empires in history. It included Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Romanians, Croats, Serbs, and Bosnians, among others. It included Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox Christians, Muslims, and Jews. It was a melting pot of cultures, and it was a place where tolerance and understanding were valued. The Habsburgs were able to hold this diverse empire together for centuries because they understood the importance of compromise. They were able to keep their subjects loyal by granting them a degree of autonomy and respect. They allowed their subjects to practice their own religions, speak their own languages, and maintain their own traditions. The Habsburg Empire was also a place of great intellectual and artistic achievement. The empire produced some of the greatest thinkers and artists in history, including composers like Mozart and Beethoven, writers like Kafka and Freud, and scientists like Mendel and Boltzmann. The empire was a center of learning and culture, and it made a significant contribution to the world. The Habsburg Empire was not without its problems. There was always tension between the different national groups, and there were frequent rebellions and uprisings. The empire was also plagued by economic problems, political corruption, and social inequality. But despite these problems, the empire endured for over 600 years. The Habsburg Empire began to decline in the 19th century. The rise of nationalism and liberalism challenged the authority of the emperor, and the empire lost many of its territories in a series of wars. The empire was weakened by the revolutions of 1848, the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, and the rise of Italy and Germany. The final blow came with World War I. The empire entered the war in 1914 with high hopes of victory, but it quickly became clear that the war was a disaster. The empire was unable to compete with the military might of the Allies, and it suffered a devastating defeat. In 1918, the empire collapsed. The emperor abdicated, and the empire was replaced by a series of new nation-states. The Habsburgs went into exile, and they were not allowed to return to Austria for many years. The collapse of the Habsburg Empire was a seismic event in European history. It marked the end of an era, and it paved the way for the rise of fascism and communism. The empire's collapse also led to the creation of new states in Europe, and it changed the political landscape of the continent forever. The Habsburgs are no longer in power, but their legacy lives on. They left behind a treasure trove of art, architecture, and culture. They built some of the most beautiful buildings in Europe, and they created a civilization that continues to inspire and fascinate people around the world. The Habsburgs also left a lasting impact on European politics. Their empire was a model of multiculturalism and tolerance, and it provides an important lesson for the world today. The Habsburgs showed that it was possible for different nations to live together in peace, and their example is still relevant. The Habsburgs continued to be a source of fascination for historians and the general public. Their story is one of power, ambition, and tragedy, and it has inspired countless books, films, and documentaries. Today, the Habsburgs are still a family. They are scattered across the globe, and they have intermarried with other royal families and ordinary people. They are no longer kings and queens, but they are still proud of their heritage, and they continue to honor the legacy of their ancestors. The Habsburgs are a reminder that even the mightiest of empires can fall, and even the most powerful of families can be forgotten. But as long as there is a single descendant who remembers the name, the story will live on. The story of the Habsburgs is a story of endings, but it is also a story of beginnings, of survival, of persistence, of a family that refused to disappear. The king died, the crown passed, the empire fell. But somewhere in the world, ordinary people may still carry the blood of the man who once ruled millions. And that is the true mystery of history, that even in death, we live on. Even in defeat, we endure. Even in silence, we speak. The blood of the Habsburgs, whether in our veins or in our hearts, is the blood of greatness. And greatness, once born, never truly dies. The king died, the crown passed, the empire fell. But somewhere in the world, ordinary people may still carry the blood of the man who once ruled millions.